There's growing fear that intensifying clashes in Sudan between the army and paramilitary forces risks turning into an all-out civil war, prompting shortages of water, medicine, food, and fuel. There's also reports of an internet blackout leading to concerns about reliable information not getting out.
Greetings from the Sarge. This episode will be very different from my previous videos, as instead of learning about military equipment, we will learn about Sudan's most powerful and brutal paramilitary group, the RSF, also known as the Rapid Support Forces. To learn about their origins, let's go back to the early 2000s when the war in Sudan's Darfur region started. For those who don't know much about the war in Darfur, let me give you a quick overview. The conflict began in April 2003 when rebels in Darfur launched an insurrection to protest against the Sudanese government for oppressing Darfur's non-Arab population. The president of Sudan at the time, Omar al-Bashir, we'll talk more about him later, launched a brutal campaign against Darfur's non-Arab population. This resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians and the indictment of Omar al-Bashir for genocide and war crimes by the International Criminal Court. To fight against the rebels in Darfur, Omar al-Bashir recruited a brutal band of mercenaries known as the Janjaweed. In conjunction with the Sudanese army, the Janjaweed were responsible for carrying out horrific crimes against humanity in Sudan's Darfur region, which resulted in the deaths of 300,000 people and the displacement of 2 million. Over time, as the Janjaweed grew from a militia to a large paramilitary force, in 2013, it became known as the Rapid Support Forces. Its leader is a brutal man named Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who also goes by Hemedti. Hemedti's brutality can be traced back to 2004 during the Adwa massacre. In Adwa, southern Darfur, Hemedti, who was a commander in the Janjaweed militia at the time, was responsible for the deaths of 126 villagers. On November 23, 2004, at 6 a.m., 2 helicopter gunships and an Antonov plane approached the village, while heavily armed militiamen entered the village with land cruisers. The men were immediately shot, while the women were detained for 2 days. Unfortunately, the young girls were repeatedly raped by the Janjaweed in front of their mothers. To cover up the atrocity, Hemedti's troops burned all the houses, burned the victims' bodies, and dumped the other corpses into wells. The attack on Adwa village is merely one example of the horrors conducted by the Janjaweed and the Sudanese military in the Darfur War. Before the outbreak of the 2023 Sudan conflict, which we'll talk more about later, the RSF played a crucial role in Sudan's domestic and international security affairs, as the RSF were involved in the war in Yemen as they fought alongside Saudi and Emirati forces. Plus, they were used as border guards to protect the Sudanese people from terrorism when they themselves have committed acts of terror against their own people. Pretty ironic, don't you think? The Rapid Support Forces played a major role in Sudan's mining industry, as they controlled a large portion of the country's gold market. This granted the RSF considerable control over Sudan's natural resources, as they were able to export them to foreign countries. This was quite bad for the Sudanese economy, because while the RSF was profiting from gold and mineral exports, the government did not. The RSF's massive enterprise has allowed the paramilitary group to grow significantly more powerful in the last few years since it was established in 2013. Human Rights Watch estimates that the RSF had 5,000 personnel in 2014. However, in 2013, it is estimated that the RSF's personnel has swelled to at least 100,000, which is staggering. This makes the RSF not only the largest paramilitary group in Africa, but one of the largest in the world. In comparison, Russia's Wagner PMC, one of the most powerful paramilitary groups in the world, has between 40 to 50,000 soldiers. In terms of manpower, this makes the RSF twice as big as Wagner. The RSF's rapid growth financially and militarily, in my opinion, is a potential factor in the outbreak of this year's civil war, or whatever you want to call it, between the Sudanese military and the RSF. However, before we discuss the ongoing Sudanese conflict, let's go over some context to understand what caused the conflict to break out. In April 2019, a military coup broke out in Sudan, and as a result, Omar al-Bashir was removed from power and was put on house arrest after months of demonstrations against his 30-year rule. The RSF and the Sudanese military were involved in this coup. According to Al Jazeera, 4 months later, after Omar al-Bashir's removal from power, the military and the pro-democracy movement reached a power-sharing deal, which established a joint military-civilian council that would govern Sudan for the next 3 years until elections were held. Hemedti became the vice chairman of the council, which was headed by Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, the current de facto leader of Sudan. A prominent Sudanese economist named Abdallah Hamdok was sworn in as Sudan's prime minister and leader of the transitional cabinet. The situation in Sudan seemed to be stable, as it appeared that the country was transitioning from a military dictatorship to a democracy. However, things would go wrong a few years later. To further consolidate their power in the Sudanese government, the RSF and the Sudanese military launched another coup d'etat in October of 2021. As a result, Abdallah Hamdok, the former prime minister, was confined to house arrest. The Joint Military-Civilian Council, also known as the Transitional Sovereignty Council, was dissolved by al-Burhan. In a televised address, Burhan stated that a new technocratic government would lead the country until the next elections, to be held in July of 2023. Sadly, those elections were never held. It's unclear which side started the conflict, but on April 15th, 2023, fighting between the RSF and the Sudanese military erupted in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. A potential factor of the conflict breaking out is possibly due to the negotiations of the RSF being fully integrated into the military. Hemedti believed that if the RSF lost its autonomy, his power would weaken. Hence, here we are now. Unfortunately, the conflict is still ongoing, and there seems to be no end in sight. Although several ceasefires and humanitarian corridors were proposed by the United States and Saudi Arabia, the fighting still rages on in Sudan. What a tragedy. It's a shame that African wars are overlooked by the rest of the world, which is why I decided to shed light on Sudan's miserable modern history and on a brutal paramilitary group that has terrorized the Sudanese people for decades. Sudan's military dictatorships and pointless wars have transformed the country from an oasis of culture with a rich history to a failed state and a war zone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out my other videos. I won't be uploading more videos for a long time, and I'll see you all next year. The Sarge is out.